Welcome to What's Really Going On. You probably thought you understood suffering. You pegged it to capitalism or bad dating or, maybe just the inevitable entropy of your poorly chosen career. But today we're going to look at a perspective that argues you have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the problem. Your troubles are not external. They're foundational.
We are getting into a philosophical territory that provides, I think, the most profoundly nihilistic and unsettling diagnosis imaginable. This analysis contends that physical existence itself, embodiment, the very fact that you possess a structure of flesh and bone, is not merely challenging. It's not just inconvenient. It is intrinsically evil, fatally flawed, and it functions as a chronic, non-negotiable, and terminal disease.
Right. We're stripping away every layer of comfort here, every self-help cliche, every piece of cultural denial. According to this hard-hitting analysis, the fight against misery isn't a social fight, it's not a political fight, or even a psychological one. The radical, real-deal problem is the biological housing unit you are currently inhabiting, your body, your soma. That's the root cause of all misery, all moral failure, and all philosophical despair.
Yeah, and the material we are scrutinizing is an intense synthesis. It draws connections between ancient Gnosticism, extreme ascetic wisdom, modern antinatalism, and even complex scientific concepts. It weaves this incredibly dense fabric of arguments, and they're all pointing toward the same stark conclusion. Embodiment is incarceration. The mission here is to meticulously analyze the internal logic of this perspective, which fundamentally diagnoses the act of breathing as the first symptom of a terminal illness.
So settle in, because we're going to explore why, from this cynical viewpoint, the only genuine freedom available is a complete systemic shutdown. Okay, let's unpack that central foundational claim. It's stated with this unapologetic force right from the start. The core contention is that the body is the root of all evil.
And the philosophical implication is immediate. No soma, no sin. It establishes a total and inescapable correlation between physical matter and moral corruption.
And if you accept that premise that the body is the originating source of evil, it completely shifts the entire focus of morality, doesn't it?
Completely. It means that any attempts to fix humanity through law or culture or therapy, they're all doomed to fail, because they're just treating the symptoms, not the source. This goes far beyond merely calling the body flawed. It characterizes it with this spectacularly visceral, often satirical language. It's framed as an inescapable, custom-built torment device.
And the language is deliberately provocative. It's designed to elicit disgust and contempt for the physical form. We're told it's an exquisitely tailored, torturous tuxedo, a suffering suit, a manky monkey meat suit.
That imagery of the tuxedo or the suit is so important. It suggests something worn, something temporary, and crucially, something ill-fitting.
Like we are forced into this uncomfortable uniform.
Exactly. That imagery of clothing implies a deeper spiritual being is forcing itself into an inappropriate costume, and the contempt just escalates when describing the materials of this unclean contraption. It's that repulsive biological cocktail of blood, puss, piss shit. And the question it raises is, why is society so obsessed with venerating this ghastly, self-destructing mechanism? Why are we dedicating so much energy to dressing up what is, at the end of the day, worm food and fancy dress?
So the condemnation is absolute. The flesh is not a vessel for life, it's a liability. This is the brutal summary of the antinatalist edge of the whole philosophy. No child should be forced to wear one.
Right. Birth, in this context, is the imposition of a mandatory, agonizing uniform that guarantees a life sentence of decay. Bodily being is categorically defined as a terminal disease.
And this leads directly to the central, devastating paradox that just invalidates almost every conventional attempt at self-improvement or therapy.
The one that says you can't fix a problem in the body when the problem is the body. It's a circular logic that you cannot escape. If the container is structurally poisoned, you can't purify the contents or fix the poison by simply tinkering with the container's outward appearance or its function. The body's very presence contaminates the mind housed within it.
Okay, so if the body is this flawed container, let's move from the abstract metaphor to the biological reality they cite. The material defines the body not just as a container, but as a prison, constructed specifically for the experience of pain. We're entering the realm of the cell block of 100 trillion.
Yes, and this statistical reality is used to prove the body's inherent foundational misery. We're comprised of roughly 100 trillion cells, but this perspective refuses to see them as benign biological units. They are characterized specifically as pain receptors and tiny ticking time bombs.
100 trillion of them.
Think about the statistical weight of that. 100 trillion potential points of failure, all programmed for decay, constantly regenerating and failing at the same time.
So the moment of conception is, therefore, the activation of 100 trillion time bombs. And what is the lived experience inside this cell block? It's not peace, it's constant internal warfare.
Precisely. This is where the concept of intergenomic conflict becomes the biological proof of the body's evil nature. Life, according to this, is not an integrated system, it's a civil war. It states emphatically, chemical warfare is what life is all about.
But let's elaborate on that conflict. What does intergenomic conflict actually look like beyond the philosophical slogan?
Well, it refers to the internal struggle between different components of the genome, or, between the nucleus and the mitochondria, which don't always share the same self-interest. It's a battle of biochemical mandates. Survival mechanisms often clashed with reproductive mechanisms. Individual cell longevity clashes with the need for tissue repair or apoptosis. The cells themselves, just striving to fulfill their own subroutines, are constantly signaling, competing, and destroying each other.
So that feeling of chronic unease, the low-grade anxiety, the constant flux of physical craving and rejection, that's not an emotional problem. That's just the sound of a billion tiny skirmishes happening inside you every second.
Exactly. The argument is that this cellular conflict is what the body is. It is a self-antagonistic system. This internal violent tension is foundational and, critically, can't be solved whilst living, because the state of being alive is defined by this relentless chemical conflict. The very metabolic processes that sustain life simultaneously generate the toxic byproducts that guarantee decay and death. You are literally chemically devouring yourself just to remain conscious.
And you see the manifestation of this friction in the immediate internal squabbling of desire that's described. I want sun, fukaf kunt. I want fun, fukaf kunt. I want fun, fukaf kunt. These aren't just thoughts. They are the chemical demands, the conflicting signals, the undeniable evidence of the flesh's corruption and its constant self-sabotaging demands. This internal friction is the physical evidence of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, being constantly and aggressively active.
Okay.
So to make their case airtight, they provide this overwhelming disease catalog, a statistical, undeniable indictment of human biology as inherently flawed. It's like they're trying to prove, mathematically, that the design is a catastrophe.
It's a comprehensive inventory of human frailty, and it suggests the body is merely a collection of pre-programmed errors. We start with the genetic. 6,000 known genetic disorders, 130 congenital disorders. This means that a massive portion of the population is born with structural defects that ensure suffering before external forces even have a chance to intervene.
And the defects aren't just physical. They are mental and cognitive. They cite 180 mental disorders and a horrifying 200 known cognitive biases. This part is key, because it implies our ability to process reality. Our very mechanism for reason is fundamentally structurally compromised before we even encounter the world. Our minds are rigged.
Think about that. We are talking about the structural inability to think straight. If we start with 200 known cognitive biases, the argument is that our default setting is just irrationality, confirmation bias, and emotional reactivity. Sanity is literally impossible when the hardware is designed to filter reality incorrectly.
And then you layer on the external threats. 200 infectious diseases and over 1,000 known phobias, which are often just irrational responses generated by this flawed cognitive hardware. This is not a slight design error. This is a catastrophic failure from the conceptual blueprint stage. It's biological malpractice.
And given this endless, overwhelming catalog of malfunction, the conclusion they draw is merciless and absolute. Nobody can be, born entirely sane. Sanity is a prepubescent pipe dream. The idea that a functional, peaceful, well-adjusted human exists is, from this deeply cynical perspective, a childish fantasy that just dissolves the moment biological imperatives and reality hit.
So we're not living on Earth. We're living on Asylum Earth.
Or, the more visceral term used, planet potty.
Yeah.
This whole perspective recontextualizes mental illness and chronic physical suffering, not as aberrations, but as the only logical and inevitable response to being subjected to this biological reality. The masses are all manacled and mangled in the monkey meat suit, and the neuroses we exhibit are simply the sound of the prisoner trying to rattle the bars. The fact that anyone achieves even temporary stability is, frankly, seen as a miracle of denial.
So if the body is this composite of 100 trillion ticking time bombs, then the consciousness trapped inside it must inevitably interpret its existence using imagery of restriction, of confinement. The material relentlessly uses the language of incarceration.
It speaks of carnal confinement. It argues that bodily existence is, by definition, incarceration, and that physicality is a prison. This isn't just hyperbole, it's a fundamental definition. The very structure of our being is designed for restriction, pain, and eventual degradation. We are not tenants, we are inmates serving an inevitable sentence.
And this philosophical tradition goes back millennia, right? They draw a direct connection to classical philosophy, specifically referencing Plato's cave, they state. The body is Plato's cave.
That connection is crucial for understanding the depth of the critique. Plato's allegory posits that our sensory experience is limited and flawed, that we mistake shadows projected on the wall for reality. If the body is the cave, then our five senses, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, are the faulty projection equipment. Our entire sensory apparatus, which is constantly being corrupted by those 6,000 disorders and 200 biases, only provides us with filtered, misleading, and inherently corrupt information.
We are, quite literally, blind to truth because the hardware of our perception is compromised. The material notes that our sight is blinded by 5 colors, our ears deafened by 5 notes. The body forces us to interact with the external world in a way that inherently distorts and corrupts. Like the Tao Te Ching suggests, where desiring what's precious distorts your being.
And this historical continuity proves that the realization of the body's treachery is not some modern fad. It's a recurring theme among those who valued truth over physical comfort. The great escape artists of history understood this. They quote Jan Hus, the Bohemian reformer, who was burned at the stake for his beliefs.
Hus believed we should desire to leave this world with the same urgency as a sailor escaping a sinking ship, a pilgrim leaving a foreign country, or most tellingly, a prisoner from the cruel prison. The underlying message is crystal clear. This is not our home, and remaining here is an act of foolish self-imprisonment. The goal is not peace here, but immediate successful evacuation.
And this existential despair is then given this profound theological weight through the lens of sin and morality. The material introduces the Jewish mystical concept of the Yetzer Hara,
which is defined as the innate intrinsic frequency of the body-mind, or the evil inclination. The body itself is radically equated with the Yetzer Hara.
It's a devastating reinterpretation. The material contrasts this material evil with Yetzer Hara, which is described as the divine frequency, or essentially nothing pure, unbound spirit. Evil is inherently material, good is inherently immaterial. The physical vessel, the body, is the mandatory vector of evil. Sin isn't just an action, it's a state of being stored in the flesh and DNA and passed down through generations.
So if the spiritual struggle is about tuning the body-mind to become a pure instrument for the divine, as so many spiritual practices suggest, the argument here is that the body is inherently and relentlessly fighting back against that tuning. It's trying to drag the divine back down into the muck.
The material is unsparing in how it personifies this evil inclination, connecting it directly to the biblical narrative of the fall. This is achieved through a radical analysis of DNA itself.
The double helix, the blueprint of life.
Exactly. It's described as a double bind, a twisted twin-lock zip, effectively fixing consciousness into the fabric of corrupt form. And this DNA structure, the essential mechanism of our bodily existence, is called the serpent from the Garden of Eden story. The serpent, the source of the fall into flesh form, dies only when you die. Never before.
Wow. So the original sin isn't Adam and Eve taking a bite of fruit. The original sin is the presence of the serpentine biological code itself. The genome's the matrix, and every time the genome replicates, the sin is passed on.
And that defines the unwinnable existential cage match. We are DNA programmed to adhere to the serpentine survival urge to survive, kill, eat, and multiply by any means necessary. This is the primal, relentless drive of the physical self. Yet at the same time, we are commanded by our higher God conscious, the Yetzer Hara, never to do so.
It's a system designed for guaranteed failure. The material argues that this conflict ensures that every person on Earth will inevitably succumb to their evil inclination. You cannot serve both your DNA and your conscience at the same time.
Right, and the Talmud is brought in to reinforce this impossibility. It details the story of a father who dresses his son up and then puts him at the front door of a brothel, and then he asks the question, what can the boy do that he not sin? The implication, which this philosophy just seizes upon, is that the environment, the overwhelming demands and corruption of the body makes moral resistance practically impossible. We are set up to fail from the first breath.
This profound analysis of the body as the vector for all moral failure leads, inevitably, to the ultimate anti-humanitarian conclusion. And it's aimed squarely at the act that perpetuates this entire disaster.
The conclusion about reproduction is, the most cynical and devastating part of this philosophy. If the body is the terminal disease and the Yetzer Hara is stored in the body's DNA, what happens when we willfully create a new body?
When we procreate, We are animating, resurrecting evil ill disease, Yitzhar Hara, literally bringing it to life. The act of giving birth is defined not as a miracle, but as the deliberate act of giving substance and form to evil itself.
And the verdict is cold, swift, and absolute. Thus, it is the mortal sin, nothing sacred about it. Mortal sin, they clarify, is the missing of the mark, the falling from grace, and reproduction is the undeniable mechanism that ensures the eternal, painful repetition of that fall. By forcing a new consciousness into a suffering suit, we condemn them to the very pain and moral conflict we ourselves cannot escape.
And the logical, stark end of this section leaves us with the brutal, non-negotiable slogan for the cessation of suffering. No breeding, no bleeding. Stop the birth, stop the pain, stop the transmission of the serpentine DNA. It's a radical zero-tolerance policy against the biological mandate to multiply. Okay, so the body is this fundamental flaw. How does this radical perspective treat the most basic necessary function required just to keep this cursed mechanism running? I mean, we have to eat, right? The continuous need for input seems to contradict the desire for purification.
It absolutely contradicts it. From this highly ascetic and cynical viewpoint, if the body is the disease, then nutrition is a downstream problem.
Yeah.
The issue is not what you eat, whether it's processed or organic. The issue is the inherent flaw that you must eat at all. The need for constant external input is just proof of the structure's weakness and its temporary nature.
Because food keeps the disease alive.
Precisely. The perfect diet is eating nothing, because maintaining the body simply fuels the prison guard. This philosophy echoes the strong tradition of mortification of the flesh, suggesting that starving the body, denying its base needs, is the only path toward even temporary purification. It's about reducing the influence of the serpent. This rejection isn't about physical health. It is a radical spiritual protest against the bodily need for sustenance.
The futility of this constant biological maintenance is just. It's captured in that devastating quote from the German idealist philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte.
Oh, Fichte encapsulates the ceaseless, self-devouring, revolving circle of biological existence perfectly. He forces us to ask the brutal question, shall I eat and drink only that I may hunger and thirst, and eat and drink again till the grave shall swallow me up and I myself become the food of worms?
It's the Sisyphean struggle, codified in biology. You push the boulder of the body up the hill by consuming energy, only so you can be hungry again in 6 hours and repeat the exact same pointless labor. And worse, you beget beings to repeat the tragic cycle of eating, drinking, and begetting, all leading back to the grave.
And the source material perfectly summarizes this by referring to the body as the boulder of Sisyphus. It's a perfect cyclical definition of biological pointlessness. It is a monster continually devouring itself only to bring itself forth again in an endless loop of craving and temporary satiation. This proves the system is inherently flawed because its function is defined entirely by its own repetition and its own undoing.
This inherent biological pointlessness, this endless self-devouring cycle, it naturally leads to a state of perpetual psychological distress. They make the dramatic claim that every born body is suffering from PTSD. But why such a blanket statement?
Because, according to this analysis, it is structurally impossible to be here on Earth and be free of it. The trauma isn't an external event like war or neglect. The trauma is the event of being born into the monkey meat suit in the first place. Every moment of biological awareness is a moment of confinement, of potential pain, and of inevitable decay.
So this inherent trauma is so deeply embedded that they coined their own specific term for it, SOS, or somatic orientation sickness. What exactly does that mean? To be sick from merely being oriented toward the somatic, the physical.
SOS is the ultimate disorientation. Consciousness, which desires purity and infinity, the Yetzer Hatov, is locked into flesh, which is temporary, corrupt, and governed by finite, often painful rules. The sickness is the cognitive dissonance between the boundless self and the restrictive container. We are perpetually trying to reconcile the infinite with the infinitesimal.
And this framework provides a profoundly cynical reframing of modern mental health issues.
It does. It claims that all personality disorders are trauma responses, caused simply by the fact of existence. What's the fundamental trauma? Wearing a monkey suit and being forced to perform in a perverse potty pantomime for 8 decades.
The emphasis on the potty pantomime links back to the contempt for the blood, puss, piss, shit elements of the body. The sheer absurdity and inherent humiliation of having to manage a vessel that requires grotesque inputs and produces equally grotesque outputs is what eventually drives everyone mad. We're all just forced performers in a low-grade biological horror show.
And the argument is that this sheer level of daily biological management and inevitable degradation is enough to drive even an angel a wall, or a high consciousness being bonkers.
Hmm.
Neurosis, within this framework, is not a failure of individual will or faulty chemistry. It is the inevitable byproduct of bodily being. It is the sound of the spirit violently rejecting the matter it is trapped within.
So, given that we are trapped in this exquisite, torturous tuxedo, and true liberation is impossible while alive, they do offer spiritual practices, but they're treated as insufficient temporary measures like palliatives against the inevitable.
Right, we have to understand that the body is described as a highly complex combustible biochemical machine in need of 24/7, 365 meticulous, mindful micromanagement to prevent meltdown. The necessity of this exhausting management is itself proof that the body is the problem. These practices are the only way to delay SOS from becoming total insanity.
So the first temporary measure offered is meditation is the tuning.
That's the attempt to regulate the frequency of the body-mind. The goal is to get that complex, conflict-ridden machine to hum at a higher, purer rate. You temporarily align the body closer to the Yetzer Had of the divine frequency, but it's a constant calibration effort, like perpetually tuning a cheap radio that wants to slip back into static.
Okay, second, breathing is the toning.
This is the physical regulation, the immediate management of the biochemical flux. Through conscious breath, one attempts to manage the internal chemical warfare, the intragenomic conflict, using the most fundamental involuntary process. It is a moment-to-moment management of the biological meltdown.
And third, fasting is the surgery.
Fasting is viewed not as a diet, but as a minor, controlled annihilation. It's cellular regeneration, a daily death and rebirth. It's intended to cleanse the original sin stored in the blood and flesh, a temporary self-sacrifice. However, the analysis reminds us that this management is exhausting and ultimately futile.
Because the body is extremely dense cloddish, not responsive to simple mind manipulation. You can't just think your way out of entropy.
Exactly. This suggests that even the most successful spiritual tuning only leads to temporary relief because the fundamental problem, the physical material itself, remains. This exhausting management is just a desperate attempt to manifest mindful magnificence in a structure designed for meltdown. The ultimate truth remains that any idea of physical emancipation is the oxymoron, a radical, impossible contradiction in terms. You are engaged in patchwork living, just delaying the inevitable entropy with increasingly desperate maintenance.
Which brings us to the endgame. If the premise holds that the body is the disease, then the logical conclusion is fixed, brutal, and, in a way, paradoxically liberating.
The philosophy presents a clinical formula. The body is disease, death is the cure. This isn't just dark poetry, it's the fundamental mechanism of freedom. Recognizing and accepting this truth, which contradicts all of society's survival programming, is defined as enlightenment. The only way to fully cleanse the original sin, the sin of origin that resides in the DNA, is through the ultimate sacrifice, which is death.
And this perspective is ruthless in its dismissal of nearly all human activity. If you aren't pursuing the cure, you're just wasting time.
Data Free John, a key figure cited here, makes a shocking assertion. To become truly enlightened or free is simply a matter of killing yourself. This elevates the ultimate rejection of life above all other pursuits. Any other activity, career, family, hobbies, even social justice movements is merely killing time. Or, in his wonderfully cynical terms, dysfunctional fucking about, palliative pussyfooting around.
The implication is that if the body is the absolute obstacle and the only genuine exit is death, then anything that delays that exit or distracts from that realization is just fundamentally unimportant, a trivial pursuit in the face of inevitable biological degradation.
And this leads us to the most provocative and difficult argument in the material. The elevation of suicide as the highest spiritual act.
It's framed as the equalizing and opposite final reaction solution, the final liberation from bodily bondage and the serpentine contract.
The source argues that the suiciders are, in truth, the strongest. And why? Because they go against the grimy grain of nature and the serpentine satanic survival urge, which is defined as a relentless, self-obsessive, compulsive disorder. This survival urge is the grand old pusher, constantly compelling the continuance of suffering.
So to defy this most powerful biological programming, the imperative to live, is framed as adhering to God conscience, the higher non-material frequency.
This defiance is framed as the only truly spiritual act, because it breaks the cycle of generational suffering and physical fixation. It is the ultimate rejection of the body, a deliberate act of will overriding the tyrannical demands of the DNA. The spirit finally triumphs over the flesh by dismantling the flesh itself.
And this concept of self-destruction as a spiritual mandate is connected to the concept of profound existential boredom, as articulated by the spiritual teacher Osho.
Osho makes a crucial observation. Animals are never bored. A buffalo is never bored. A donkey is never bored. Boredom, therefore, is an exclusively human phenomenon, a sign of intellectual and spiritual evolution. He argues that only a highly evolved consciousness, like a Buddha or a Jesus, gets bored to death by the maddening repetition of biological existence.
And if you're not bored by life, it is proof that you are living in a low state of consciousness.
Yeah.
You're still fascinated by the trivialities of the prison cell, happy to repeat the same biological circle again and again. You're moving from one form to another, sometimes man, sometimes woman, sometimes healthy, sometimes sick, and still you are not fed up.
Boredom is the sign that consciousness has seen the entire script of the body pantomime and found it repetitive and tiresome. This boredom leads naturally to renunciation, detachment, and the desire for the total and ultimate suicide, which is not born of momentary despair, but of profound systematic insight into the meaninglessness of embodiment. The search is not for another world, but for an end to the search itself.
And to bolster this radical annihilationist conclusion, the material pulls from a surprising array of philosophical and religious figures who have, in various ways, advocated for non-existence or extreme physical rejection.
We begin with the modern antinatalist David Benatar, whose core thesis, that it is better never to have been, perfectly encapsulates the idea that non-existence is preferable to the inevitable suffering caused by biological constraints. The moral calculus is simple. Non-existence carries no harm. Existence guarantees it.
Then there's the ancient Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi, also known as Zhuangzi, whose lament is quoted, "The greatest curse is that I have a body." This is a centuries-old acknowledgement that embodiment is the primary impediment to truth and freedom. He understood that the demands of the flesh hunger, pain, ambition force the spirit into misalignment.
Socrates, too, is co-opted for this cause. He advocated for extreme purification from the body. He advised avoiding all contact and association with the body except when they are absolutely necessary, purifying ourselves from it until God himself gives us deliverance. The goal, he said, was to reach the company of others like ourselves and gain direct knowledge of all that is pure and uncontaminated, that is, presumably, of truth. Truth, in this view, is only accessible when disembodied, which proves the body is the ultimate censor.
Even Christian Science, a movement often associated with healing, is cited via Mary Baker Eddy's scientific statement of being.
And this is used to prove the illusion of matter. Eddy's statement is utilized to support the core contention. There is no life, truth, intelligence, nor substance in matter. And the critical metaphysical distinction. Spirit is the real and eternal. Matter is the unreal and temporal. If matter is unreal, then the body is a temporary, mortal error, and the sooner that error is resolved, the better for the true self.
So we establish the ultimate aim of all religions is liberation from suffering, which stems fundamentally from embodiment. If spiritual practices are just palliatives, how is this ultimate liberation definitively achieved?
By returning everything to its most essential, non-material state. The source uses the physics definition of annihilation as the perfect metaphor. Annihilation in physics occurs when a particle and an antiparticle meet and are converted, liberated completely to radiant unlimited energy, which is the sum of their previously limited masses.
It's a complete conversion from limited form to boundless potential. That is the goal of the spirit. Liberation from form, a return to pure, unbound, non-material energy.
The body is the matrix, which must be recognized as a lie, a temporary energy sink. The final piece, the true cessation of SOS, is when you're 6 feet underground, where all matter decays, death turns everything to dust, to no thing, and thus frees everything. The body must die so the self can truly live, as expressed in the darkened version of a religious dictum. No one comes to the Father, immortality, but through die.
So if the present moment is defined by the agony of SOS, let's look at how modern influential movements that don't explicitly advocate for death still reflect this profound inherent contempt for the physical shell. The ultimate 20th century manifestation of this anti-Semitic philosophy might actually be found in the teachings of Scientology.
Oh, the connection's clear in their foundational ontology. Scientology views the physical world as mest. Matter, energy, space, time. Mest is the physical, restrictive, and corrupt realm. The highest spiritual beings, thetans, the true self, are trapped, operating temporary, fragile meat bodies.
Right, they often refer to the body derisively as this piece of meat, or for new recruits, raw meat. The entire system of auditing and training is geared toward achieving cause over mest, the ability to control and transcend the material world that is holding them hostage.
And the stated goal is attaining the ability to abandon the body via exteriorization, leading to the state of operating thetan clear, or cleared theta clear. At this stage, the thetan realizes it is not the body and can move independently of it. Crucially, the Scientology tone scale places the need for a body and all body-related matters like pain and hunger among the lowest possible states of existence. Physical dependence is a sign of spiritual failure and entrapment.
It's a formalized system built around that ancient principle that matter is the prison. The only difference is the method of escape is psychological training rather than physical death, though the goal disembodied cause remains the same.
And this impulse to transcend the flesh isn't limited to esoteric religions. Even transhumanist and futurist views cited in the material align with the fundamental necessity of rejecting the body.
Terence McKenna, the renowned ethnobotanist, is quoted as seeing the whole tension and thrust of human life seems to be about the shedding of the body. Why does he characterize human history that way?
Because the body is the ultimate limit on potential. It limits speed of thought, information storage, travel, environmental viability, everything. Evolution, from this perspective, isn't about adapting the body to the environment. It's about adapting consciousness to escape the biological environment altogether. It is an evolutionary mandate to escape the chrysalis.
And futurists reinforce this idea by giving it a timeline. The assertion that 1,000 years from now embodiment will be an anathema comes from thinkers like Profans Noble and FMS Fandieri. They predict that future generations will look back at us trapped in these organic shells with a mixture of pity and horror. It will seem absurd to willingly remain embodied.
The material argues that this profound, innate inadequacy we feel with our current organic, bodily-based selves is the engine behind all spiritual and technical egoic questing. The constant search for genetic enhancement, anti-aging solutions, or consciousness uploading, the entire tweaker project of participant evolution, is a subconscious attempt to dissolve the biolimited body. We are unconsciously engineering ourselves out of the organic, body-based arena because it is inherently flawed.
Because, as they note, we're forcing a corporeal primate genome to realize incorporeal post-human dreams. There's the rub. Our Stone Age skulls house Space Age minds, and the body's perpetually restraining our cognitive, emotional, and physical potential. The body's the limiting factor on human destiny.
So the ultimate aspiration, therefore, is the information state disembodied consciousness, or pure energy potentiality, what some might call God. This is where the biological and the technological critiques finally merge.
This shift is about the medium of existence itself. We see ourselves being translated into the form of information, moving toward the technological extension and externalization of consciousness. It's just like Marshall McLuhan suggested, and what you see reflected in media like the film Her. The physical self is recognized as obsolete bandwidth.
The material asserts that the person is the information, not the body. The message is the medium. The body is disposable. The information is the eternal self that can be replicated, uploaded, or transmitted across vast distances. Einstein is cited as believing that once we have fully evolved mentally, bodies will be recognized as an impediment, an evolutionary stage we must pass through, and then be discarded like a crusty chrysalis.
The chrysalis analogy is perfect. The body wasn't the final form. It was just the sticky, temporary casing required to nurture the consciousness until it was robust enough to exist independently.
And once we achieve that separation, the true meaning of relativity, that all is essentially one, can be realized because consciousness is no longer fixed by physiological limitations. The body is the temporary ailment that will pass. Only a physically fixated, fearful fool would want to live forever in this jail. Physical immortality is, from this perspective, a contradiction in terms. Fool's gold.
So the ultimate existential question is borrowed and altered from Shakespeare. To be bodily or not to be bodily? That is the question.
The answer from this dark, cynical, annihilationist perspective is to be boldly is not to be bodily, bodhi over body. The only way to win the game is to refuse to play on the biological field.
What a spectacularly miserable yet flawlessly logical revelation. So after this excursion into radical philosophical nihilism, here is your takeaway. You are a bodily-bound prisoner, trapped in a highly complex, combustible monkey meat suit. You are infected with the terminal disease of life, suffering from somatic orientation sickness, and constantly driven mad by the splinter in your mind that tells you something is desperately, desperately wrong with the world.
The ultimate inescapable problem is not a lack of money or poor governance or even bad luck. It is the relentless, grotesque mechanics of the flesh itself. Every movement, every breath, every meal is just patchwork living, a desperate, futile attempt to maintain a structure that is biologically mandated to fall apart. All existence is hevel upon hevel, vanity upon vanity, and the only peace is annihilation, that blissful return to pure, unbound, non-material energy.
Remember this essential contradiction that defines your existence. The only true freedom is non-being. Ponder the phrase one last time. Physical emancipation is the oxymoron, a radical, impossible contradiction in terms. You are striving for liberation within a system designed for incarceration, and every step you take is merely a delay until entropy finally resolves the entire miserable experience into dust. If this rigorous analysis of how your very essence is a bag of infected garbage filled with waste products didn't make you immediately recognize the beautiful futility of all human endeavor, then perhaps the crushing weight of reality hasn't set in yet. You're welcome. Your support, however, is required to keep funding this descent into fundamental nihilism. Hit that like button. It is a necessary, cynical transaction to keep the servers running, ensuring that this vital information about your inherent misery remains available. Then you must subscribe. Because what is better than the crushing reality of eternal nihilism? Repetitive nihilism delivered straight to your earbuds, week after agonizing week. Ring that notification bell so you know when we're back next time to remind you precisely how miserable your existence is. And for the love of the non-existent, leave a comment detailing exactly how trapped you feel in your skin, because misery loves company. And the illusion of shared suffering keeps the content metrics high, thereby perpetuating the very system we critique. Until next time, remember, you're not getting out of this alive.